Jiang Shengsheng gave all her best youth to Lu Mingfei, but who knew that the man would cruelly abandon her? At this time, she met another man. When she lay in the arms of another man, Lu Mingfei, who had always ignored Jiang Shengsheng, realized how wrong he was. The winter in Yueqing is very cold. Although the heater is on in the house, you don't feel the cold, but the north wind outside is howling all night long. Jiang Shengsheng slept very restlessly that night, tossing and turning and having the same dream over and over again. She dreamed that she returned to the small house where she used to live with Miss Jiang. Miss Jiang was cooking in the kitchen. The aroma of the food went straight into her nose, but she was eating happily when Miss Jiang suddenly knocked over her bowl and slapped her in the face. She was beaten unconscious, but Miss Jiang kept cursing her and telling her to die. Later, Miss Jiang started to hug her and cry while scolding her. Finally, Miss Jiang went crazy and wanted to jump off the building with her. In her dream, she didn't cry or resist. She just nestled in Miss Jiang's arms like a baby in swaddling clothes, and she felt extremely warm. Even if the moment of death comes, her blood and Miss Jiang's blood will eventually mix together. When I woke up, the sky was bright, but the long snow had not stopped. Shadows of daylight shone through the window. Jiang Shengsheng looked at the phone message from Secretary Zhang about her father's current address and pursed her lips slightly. How is this man who ruined Miss Jiang's life doing now? After being in a daze for a while, she got up to wash up. Looking at her increasingly haggard face in the mirror, she still forced a smile. For a moment, she seemed to have an attachment to this world, and wished she could live one more day. Even just for one day. In the living room, Fu Jinji and Fu Jinyan were drinking coffee, and there were 2 suitcases against the wall. Why have you packed your luggage? Are you leaving today? Jiang Shengsheng asked, looking at the 2 pieces of luggage in the corner. Seeing Fu Jinyan lowering his head to drink coffee without answering, Fu Jinji said, Jinyan has work to do and needs to go on a business trip for a while. It's urgent, so he's leaving today. It's so sudden. I'll take you there later, she said to Fu Jinyan. When Fu Jinyan looked up, he met her smiling eyes, and his eyes couldn't help but feel a little sore. He shrugged casually, whatever, I have to go on a business trip for a while, you must remember to miss me and write to me. It's old-fashioned. Who still writes letters these days? I'll call you. But Fu Jinyan's expression was very serious. He smiled and stared into her eyes. No, you have to write a letter, you must remember to write, I'm waiting for you. Fu Jinyan rarely had such a serious expression. Although Jiang Shengsheng didn't understand, he still nodded and agreed. After dinner, Fu Jinji and Jiang Shengsheng went to the airport together to see Fu Jinyan off. The airport was bustling with people and the hall was noisy. The overhead broadcast was already urging people to board the plane. Jiang Shengsheng waved to Fu Jinyan. See you when you finish your work, have a good trip and everything goes well. Not knowing how to say goodbye, Fu Jinyan suddenly reached out and gave Jiang Shengsheng a gentle hug. He leaned his head against her ear and tried to say something rather pretentious in a relaxed tone. Shengsheng, I'm sorry I can't always be with you. Jiang Shengsheng was a little confused by his sudden hug and didn't hear anything wrong in his tone. Don't be sorry, work is important too. Fu Jinyan hugged her tighter and lowered his voice. I mean, I'm a deserter. From now on, no matter where I go, I'm afraid I'll think of you. The airport broadcast was too loud and his voice was too soft. This sentence was cut into pieces by the noisy voices, and Jiang Shengsheng could only hear a few words sporadically. What? Fu Jinyan let her go, and touched her head with a smile. Nothing, I'm leaving now. He suddenly paused, a sob inexplicably formed in his throat, and he said goodbye to her very seriously. Shengsheng, goodbye. Jiang Shengsheng just smiled normally. Jinyan, goodbye. Fu Jinji patted his shoulder without saying a word, motioning him to go first. Fu Jinyan looked at Jiang Shengsheng deeply, turned around reluctantly, but did not look back once. Somehow, Jiang Shengsheng actually saw some determination and resolve in his back as he left. After Fu Jinyan's figure completely disappeared in the crowd, Fu Jinji raised his hand and looked at the watch on his wrist. It's almost time, let's go back, we still need to take medicine. On the way back, Jiang Shengsheng sat in the passenger seat, leaning against the seat and staring at the scenery outside the window in a daze. After a long while, she suddenly asked, if I receive treatment now, can I live a few more months? Fu Jinji, who was driving, suddenly braked and stopped the car on the side of the road. He looked at Jiang Shengsheng for a few seconds and smiled. Yes. This world is so good that it makes her desire for life. Before receiving formal treatment, Fu Jinji took Jiang Shengsheng to City A. According to the address Secretary Zhang gave last time, Jiang Shengsheng's biological father is here. Her father, Zhao Yu, was born into a musical family. When he was young, he had no future and was just hanging around. But after he got married and started a family in middle age, he became a famous pianist. He was successful and had a son who was a few years younger than Jiang Shengsheng. His life was truly happy and fulfilling. City A is not far from Yueqing, and it is still cold in winter. The car is parked in the driveway of this luxurious community, where every household has a single-family villa. The heavy snow on the road outside the villa has been cleared away and very few people pass by here. Jiang Shengsheng looked at the information that Fu Jinji had searched for. The man in the photo had his hair combed back and every strand was meticulously groomed. The man's face looked mature, and he looked even more gentle and elegant with a pair of narrow-framed gold-rimmed glasses. I think he was also very handsome when he was young. I don't know how long I sat in the car when I heard the sound of a car in the distance. A black car stopped at the door and wanted to enter the villa, but was blocked by Fu Jinji's car on the road. After a while, a middle-aged man came out. He looked quite similar to the person in the photo, but he seemed gentler in real life. Boom boom boom. The man knocked lightly on the car window. Jiang Shengsheng opened the car door from the passenger side and walked out. The cold wind blew into her neck. She tightened the scarf around her neck, but her eyes fell on the middle-aged man in front of her. The man saw him and walked forward. Little girl, it's not easy to park here. Move forward, you are blocking my door. Jiang Shengsheng didn't intend to talk about the car, but just asked him, are you Zhao Yu, Mr. Zhao? The man was stunned for a moment, then nodded. Yes, oh. I see, little girl, do you want an autograph? Zhao Yu's tone of voice was indeed gentle and polite. Jiang Shengsheng had not intended to ask for an autograph, but at this moment he nodded slightly. Okay. She took out a pen and paper from the car and handed them to Zhao Yu. She watched Zhao Yu sign his name on the paper in a flamboyant manner before handing the notebook to her. Here, little girl, it's cold. Look, your face is frozen white. Go back quickly. This person who had been missing from her life for her entire life just appeared before her as a stranger. Before coming here, she had imagined countless possibilities. She would hate this person, scold this person, and might even slap him in the face to vent her anger on Miss Jiang and herself. But when I actually saw him, I suddenly felt relieved. Dad! You're back. Did you buy me a new violin? A boy in a black down jacket came out from the gate. He was so young, and there was still some childishness on his face. Zhao Yu turned around and smiled lovingly. I bought it. Brat. Jiang Shengsheng looked at this scene and suddenly his eyes became moist. The fatherly love that she had never had turned out to be so gentle from someone else. She suddenly wanted to ask a question, so she blurted out, Mr. Zhao, have you been happy these years? Zhao Yu looked at her in surprise, his pupils trembling slightly. But he still just smiled and nodded lovingly. Little girl, you look a lot like a friend of mine. As he spoke, he took out a handkerchief from his suit pocket and handed it to her. Jiang Shengsheng then realized that tears had fallen from her eyes at some point. She took the handkerchief, feeling sad and painful in her heart. She really envied her brother, whom she had never met, who could receive all the love from her father. However, the love and hate entanglement of the previous generation came to an end when she only had a few months left to live. There shouldn't be any waves out of the blue. Thank you, Mr. Zhao, you are such a good father. Goodbye. She bowed to him, turned around and opened the car door. Zhao Yu called her again. Girl, young people should take good care of their bodies. Wear more clothes when it's cold. Girls should not lose weight. It's not good to be too thin. You should eat well. Jiang Shengsheng didn't dare to look back, fearing that she would lose her composure. She just wiped away her tears and got into the car. Got it. Then he turned to Fu Jinji and said, Brother Fu, let's go. Fu Jinji silently took out a tissue and handed it to her, then drove away. When he saw Zhao Yu's figure completely disappear in the rearview mirror, he said, he can't be seen anymore. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a slight sobbing sound coming from the passenger seat. She cried sadly, and Fu Jinji turned on the stereo and played a soft and lyrical song, silently accompanying her. When she is tired of crying, he will naturally take her home. After a brief meeting with Zhao Yu, Jiang Shengsheng took Fu Jinji back to his hometown. This was where she had lived for 20 years, but with the passing of Miss Jiang, this place had long lost its vitality. The house had been abandoned for half a year, and there was a thick layer of dust on the dust cover. There was a portrait of Miss Jiang on the table against the wall in the living room. Jiang Shengsheng wiped off the dust and put the portrait back in its place. Miss Jiang in the photo is no longer as youthful and charming as she was in her youth. Her eyes are cold and filled with sorrow. Seeing Zhao Yu's happy life now, Jiang Shengsheng finally understood why Miss Jiang could not live anymore and resolutely chose to leave this world. Miss Jiang's life was a tragedy. She was proud and stubborn. She knew that she had entrusted her trust to the wrong person, so she never saw that man again in her life. She chose to give birth to herself because she had given all her love to her. She loved herself but also hated her own existence, which reminded her of this wrong relationship day after day. Later, she was going to marry Lu Mingfei. She felt that she would live a happy life and did not need her vicious and indifferent mother. Depression has tormented her for a long time, and she thought it was time to get relief. Jiang Shengsheng stroked the face of the woman in the photo and spoke to her so gently and calmly for the first time. Mom, you have worked hard. Thank you for giving birth to me regardless of everything. Her memory was filled with Miss Zhang's verbal abuse and beatings, but at this moment she finally reconciled with the past. Ding! The cell phone rang, seeming particularly abrupt at this moment. Jiang Shengsheng answered the phone. Yes, express delivery? Yes, I'm at home. It was a call from the courier, and the delivery address was actually her hometown. She hadn't used this courier address for many years. After a while, the courier followed the address and found the home accurately. Jiang Shengsheng took a look and found that the address of the mail was City A and the sender was unknown. When she saw the mailing address, she had a vague idea of who it was from, but she was still not sure. It wasn't until she opened the express box that she saw a violin and a pink scarf that didn't quite suit her. The moment she saw the thing, she couldn't help but feel tears in her eyes. It was sent by Zhao Yu. Maybe when they met, Zhao Yu had already guessed who she was. The things he sent were a kind of compensation for the indifference over the years. Although such compensation seemed insignificant, it was better than doing nothing. After all, having an illegitimate daughter was like a nightmare for both him and Jiang Shengsheng. All the resentment and hatred over the years didn't seem to be that important anymore. In fact, all Jiang Shengsheng hoped for was just a little bit of love. Fu Jinji patted her back gently and said softly, "Don't cry anymore today. Crying too much is bad for your eyes." Jiang Shengsheng burst into laughter and wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm not crying, Brother Fu. I want to sleep here for the last time today, I'll tidy up the living room and sleep here tonight. This small house, which is less than 100 square meters, has old decoration and is not very convenient for living. It is estimated that Fu Jinji has never spent a night in such an environment in his life. But here." Fu Jinji knew what she was struggling with, and had already started to clean up the table while speaking. "Don't worry about me. I'm a man. I can sleep on the bed or the floor. You're not in good health right now, and I don't feel comfortable staying too far away from you." Jiang Shengsheng didn't know how scared Fu Jinji was when Haisha fainted. If Fu Jinyan hadn't been there that day, he might not have been able to see her. Jiang Shengsheng probably understood his nervousness and did not refuse forcefully. After all, it was not the first time they lived under the same roof, and deliberately avoiding suspicion would be hypocritical. The small bedroom next door is where she lived since she was a child. There are several yellowed and old star posters on the wall. This was her only childhood. She used to think that the childhood was painful and aggrieved, but now she thinks it is so beautiful. After tidying up the room simply, Fu Jinji ordered some porridge for her, which solved her dinner for the day. Lying on the familiar bed at night, Jiang Shengsheng listened to the TV still playing in the living room next door. She remembered that many years ago, Miss Jiang was watching TV next door. She lay on the bed, listening to the sound of the TV and slept particularly soundly. But today she couldn't sleep, so she got up and went to the living room, where she saw Fu Jinji still holding his laptop, checking something. He was so serious that he didn't even notice she was approaching him. Jiang Shengsheng saw that the computer screen was filled with entries about gastric cancer treatment methods, pain-relieving treatment plans, and so on. "Why are you here? Can't you sleep?" Fu Jinji noticed her approaching and subconsciously closed his computer. Jiang Shengsheng stood there for a while, walked around to the sofa, sat down next to him, and said sullenly, "It's a bit cold, I can't sleep." Hearing her say she was cold, Fu Jinji draped his blanket over her and said, "The heating in this house isn't very effective. Keep warm for a while. I'll go boil some hot water and fill 2 hot water bottles for you." As soon as he stood up, Jiang Shengsheng grabbed his wrist. "Brother Fu, loving someone like me is a very painful thing. Sometimes, the feelings between adults are stronger and more direct." Fu Jinji never said that he loved Jiang Shengsheng, but they both knew it unknowingly. He reached out and gently stroked her head, not backing off. His eyes were as calm as water, yet full of determination. "Shengsheng, I don't want to escape." Fu Jinji will always remember that he first met Jiang Shengsheng downstairs of his group. At that time, the assistant said that a young lady wanted to persuade him to invest in a new project. He had high standards and never considered such small, emerging companies. But it rained heavily that day and her hair was soaked, but she didn't leave. She just wanted to talk to him for a few minutes when he got off work. When he got off work, he just glanced at her in such a state of disgrace, got into his car and prepared to leave without saying a word. Jiang Shengsheng held a piece of information tightly in his arms and ran after his car for a long distance. He saw her stubborn figure through the rearview mirror and softened his heart for the first time in his life. The car had clearly been driven very far away, but for some unknown reason he had someone drive it back. When Jiang Shengsheng saw his car parked in front of her again, her eyebrows curved and her eyes seemed to be filled with crushed stars. He didn't know how to describe it, and no matter how he put it, it seemed a bit cliché. After that, she was like a seed buried deep in his heart. He watched her lead the project so brilliantly, watched her busy in the wind and rain every day, and watched her always with a smile on her face even when she was wronged. Fu Jinji had long developed a heart of stone, but compared to Jiang Shengsheng's cruelty to him, he was just soft-hearted at first, then felt a little distressed, and later, it seemed that she always appeared in his dreams, making him unable to sleep all night. And after so many years, he finally had the chance to get to know her again. At this moment, she was holding his wrist just like that, just inches away from him. Fu Jinji moved closer, sat back next to her, and continued, "I will never regret it." The 3 words "no regrets" are more important than all the promises. They are the courage to love someone without regrets even if you die. Jiang Shengsheng looked down at the man's broad palm that she was holding, and gently stroked it inch by inch with her thumb. The warmth of the man's palm could be felt at her fingertips, and she could sense the direction in which his palm lines extended. She didn't dare to look up, but couldn't control the sob in her voice. "I will only accompany you to the end if you don't regret it." The wind outside the window was blowing so hard that the doors and windows were rattling. The 2 people in the room hugged each other gently, absorbing the warmth from the cold winter. Early the next morning, Jiang Shengsheng was awakened from his dream by the smell of food. Her illness made it impossible for her to eat foods that were difficult to digest, so the breakfast Fu Jinji prepared was liquid food such as soup and rice porridge. "Wake up, go wash up and eat." Although her stomach began to rumble, she didn't want to worry Fu Jinji, so she forced herself to eat something after washing up. Unfortunately, halfway through breakfast, there was a knock on the door. She thought it was the neighbor next door, so she got up and opened the door herself, signaling Fu Jinji to eat well. But when the door opened, an uninvited guest came, Lu Mingfei's mother Su Yumei. But Su Yumei's attitude towards her this time seemed like a completely different person. "Shengsheng, it's a relief that you're still here. Have you had breakfast? Auntie bought you breakfast." Su Yumei's sudden enthusiasm really made her feel uncomfortable, and she didn't like Su Yumei, so she just asked expressionlessly, "What do you want to see me for today?" Su Yumei's expression froze for a moment, then she smiled. "Shengsheng, it was always Auntie's fault before, but Mingfei was thinking about you. You've been with Mingfei for 8 years, and you're about to get married. Why don't you stop being upset with him?" Jiang Shengsheng glanced at her coldly. It turned out that until now, this woman still thought that she was just having a quarrel with her son. Seeing that Jiang Shengsheng didn't answer, Su Yumei felt that there was a chance, and said, "Look, I didn't know you were President Zhang's granddaughter before. Auntie will definitely treat you well in the future. You and Mingfei will live a good life together in the future. With the Jiang family as your backing, your future life will definitely be prosperous and smooth." Jiang Shengsheng couldn't help laughing when he heard this. Although Lu Mingfei was smart, his mother Su Yumei could never change the materialistic face of a country woman. Even now he still dreams of relying on the Jiang family. Her face immediately turned cold and she was about to close the door, but was stopped by Su Yumei again. "Shengsheng, Auntie is your elder after all, you can't do this." Jiang Shengsheng didn't want to reason with her at all, so he had no choice but to call Lu Mingfei and take the person away. I could hear the roar of traffic on the other end of the phone, and someone was heading this way. Lu Mingfei originally wanted to say a few more words to her, but she hung up the phone very decisively. Su Yumei was an unreasonable person, so Jiang Shengsheng simply didn't bother to care and turned around to have some breakfast with Fu Jinji again. Fu Jinji was extremely annoyed at being disturbed, and frowned unconsciously. "How about I ask someone to drive them away?" Jiang Shengsheng shook his head. "Let Lu Mingfei handle it himself. We are the younger generation. You will have to deal with Lu Mingfei in the business world in the future. It will be bad for you if it gets out. She used to be a person in the business world, and reputation is still very important for a businessman. It doesn't matter to her, but she always has to consider Fu Jinji more." At first, Su Yumei could tolerate Jiang Shengsheng's ignoring her, but after seeing her ignoring her for a long time, she finally couldn't bear it anymore. "I see. You have a new lover now, and you have fallen in love with someone else, so you don't take me seriously anymore." Jiang Shengsheng drank a mouthful of porridge expressionlessly without even raising his head. "I'm glad to know." Seeing her being so confident, Su Yumei became angry. "If I had known that she was a member of the Jiang family, I should have arranged the marriage earlier. It has been delayed until now and someone else has taken advantage of the opportunity." The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. Today she was determined to break them up. "Shengsheng, to be honest, I'm sorry for you. You and Mingfei had a child before, but unfortunately you couldn't keep the child. Your health has also been affected. I'm afraid you won't have children in the future. But our family doesn't mind." Jiang Shengsheng paused in his injured movements and couldn't help but clench the spoon tightly. She knew very well that Su Yumei's words were full of hidden meaning, telling Fu Jinji that she was not worthy of being with him. But it's really ridiculous. If it weren't for Lu Mingfei, she wouldn't have become like this. How could she still have the nerve to say whether she disliked him or not? Disdain? Su Yumei, why don't you go and ask around, what kind of family is the Jiang family in Nancheng? Don't say that I just can't have children. Even if I become a vegetable with half my body paralyzed, there are countless people who want to marry me, and it won't be his turn, Lu Mingfei. When Su Yumei heard her talk about her son like this, she could no longer pretend. You think you're so great just because you're a member of the Jiang family, right? Aren't you just a slut? Jiang Shengsheng slammed the spoon on the table and was about to get angry, but a warm and strong hand covered him. Fu Jingji only showed his gentleness to her. Don't be angry, it's not good for your health, so let me handle it. After saying that, he took out his cell phone and sent a message. Within 3 minutes, a group of bodyguards in black suits came upstairs and carried Suyume out of the house without saying a word. Suyume wanted to scream, but someone covered her mouth before she could make a sound. Fu Jingji touched Jiang Shengsheng's head and comforted her. Don't take those words to heart, don't make yourself unhappy. With him standing so firmly on her side, Jiang Shengsheng really had nothing to be unhappy about. She stretched out her hands and hooked them around Fu Jingji's neck. Her eyes were so warm, yet also revealed a hint of sadness. Tell me, if we had met earlier, would the ending be different? Fu Jingji put his arm around her waist, gently held her in his arms, lowered his head and whispered in her ear, no matter whether it's early or late, you are my best arrangement. Jiang Shengsheng just snuggled deeper into his arms, allowing herself to feel his heartbeat more clearly and the warmth of his body. This made her feel happy and painful, because she knew too well that this relationship was a train heading towards death. But no one wanted to get off the train, no one wanted to stop, and from that moment on, they just watched the train move forward until it reached its destination. After more than an hour, Lu Mingfei finally arrived by car. However, after not seeing Lu Mingfei for a few days, he seemed like a completely different person. He was no longer as energetic as before. He had a decadent and tired look, and his eyes also revealed a bit of vicissitudes. Seeing Jiang Shengsheng standing at the door, he stared at her in a daze for a long time. She was so strange and yet so familiar. But Jiang Shengsheng's face was surprisingly calm. Auntie is downstairs, you can take her back yourself. After she finished speaking, she was about to close the door, but was blocked by Lu Mingfei's hand. She frowned slightly. Anything else? Lu Mingfei moved his lips with difficulty and finally found his voice. Shengsheng, are you sick? Jiang Shengsheng laughed mockingly. I thought you knew about this when I was away, but I didn't expect you to know it now. You were so sick, you could have told me earlier. If I had known, I would definitely. What will you be sure of? Seeing the disdain in Jiang Shengsheng's eyes, Lu Mingfei swallowed his words again. If he had known that Jiang Shengsheng was terminally ill, he thought he would really cherish the last time he spent with Jiang Shengsheng. But that is not necessarily love. Jiang Shengsheng understood him best, so he just laughed sarcastically. Boss Lu, I don't need any pity. I am living a good life now and no longer need any false concern from you. From the very beginning, Jiang Shengsheng's attitude was very determined, but Lu Mingfei didn't believe it and was unwilling to give up. His eyes suddenly turned red, and he grabbed her shoulders and forced her to face him. Shengsheng, after what happened with Zhou Yun, I regret every day. I regret that I didn't take good care of you, didn't love you well, and didn't marry you home earlier. I can't sleep every day. When I close my eyes, all I see is your face. I can't imagine how I'm going to live without you in the future. The door creaked open behind Jiang Shengsheng. When Lu Mingfei raised his eyes, he saw Fu Jingji opening the door and standing behind Jiang Shengsheng. His eyes, as cold as a deep pool, fell lightly on his hand that was on Jiang Shengsheng's shoulder. His heart skipped a beat for no reason. Jiang Shengsheng moved aside and pulled his hand away from his shoulder. Jiang Shengsheng didn't say anything. Fu Jingji spoke first, his tone gloomy. Mr. Lu, I don't think you want to lose everything you have now. This was obviously a threat, but given the disparity in status between the two parties, Lu Mingfei, as a businessman who had been weighing the pros and cons for half his life, naturally knew the difference. He glanced at Jiang Shengsheng reluctantly, and with red eyes he forced out a bitter smile. Do you stop loving me because of Fu Jingji? Shengsheng, think about it, how long have you known him? We have been together for 8 years, 8 years. How can you be so cruel to abandon our 8 years like this? If someone didn't know the inside story, seeing Lu Mingfei like this, they would think that it was Jiang Shengsheng who abandoned them and betrayed their relationship. Jiang Shengsheng took Fu Jingji's broad hand with one hand, with a smile in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Yes, I love someone else. She turned to look at Lu Mingfei. Also, it was you, Mr. Lu, who gave up these 8 years, so please don't bother us anymore. I have my own new life. Lu Mingfei stood there in a daze for a long time, and it took him a while to understand the meaning of this sentence. He loosened his grip and took a step back toward the door. Shengsheng, I'm leaving. There was no attempt to retain him as he had imagined, and the only response he got was a tightly closed, cold door. He walked down the stairs dejectedly, step by step, and finally shed a tear halfway. They clearly loved each other like that before, how come one day it turned out like this? He couldn't figure it out, but when he looked back at this slightly old house, his mind popped up the time when he and Jiang Shengsheng had just graduated from college. They also rented a small house like this. Jiang Shengsheng would cook delicious food for him in different ways every day. When he was drunk, she would prepare so-bring soup for him. When he was hungry, they would cook a bowl of vegetable noodles without even any meat and eat it happily. Scenes from the past flashed before his eyes and he stopped, unable to hold back his tears. Some people, meeting and having them costs almost nothing, but once you miss them, you will be separated from them forever, without knowing whether you are alive or dead. But even so, life must go on. After returning to Yueqing, Lu Mingfei was told that something had happened in the company. From yesterday to this morning, many of the deals that had been negotiated had been lost. Those partners were willing to pay huge penalties and cut off all business dealings with Lu Mingfei. After listening to this, Lu Mingfei was silent for a long time before asking, "Is it the Jiang family's intention?" Secretary Yang shook his head. "It is said that it was Mr. Fu's idea. As for the reason, I guess everyone has figured it out by now. This circle is not big, but not small either. Everyone will know about any little movement. Fu Jingji's fiancée is Lu Mingfei's ex-girlfriend. Some time ago, the news that Lu Mingfei cheated on his secretary was a hot topic. Fu Jingji made this statement at this moment, firstly to vent his anger for his fiancée, and secondly to declare his sovereignty, which was also a disguised acknowledgement of the fact that Lu Mingfei cheated. Lu Mingfei couldn't help but tighten his hands, and he couldn't tell whether he was sad or regretful. Why not the Jiang family? She doesn't even want to hate me. If a woman no longer feels hatred after a breakup, it proves that she no longer loves him. Lu Mingfei was so overwhelmed by the company's affairs that he didn't go home to have a good sleep for a whole month. If it weren't for his solid foundation, it would have been difficult for him to survive this disaster. Of course, this was also because Fu Jingji did not use any harsh force on him. But even so, half of his efforts over the past years were in vain. He finally got home and thought he could have some peace and quiet, but Su Yumei kept nagging in his ear again. "I told you Jiang Shengsheng wasn't a good person. I told you to stay away from her but you didn't listen. Now you see, she has forgotten about you and even dared to treat me like that. It's a blessing for our Lu family's ancestors that we didn't marry her." Lu Mingfei didn't know how Jiang Shengsheng had endured all this sarcasm in the past, but now he himself felt annoyed just listening to it. "Mom, can you please stop talking? Shengsheng has never done anything wrong to you before, and she doesn't need to climb up the social ladder now. Why do you have to say such harsh words? She is almost dying, can you please let her go? Do you think my words are harsh? Did I say what did you say? She is dying?" Su Yumei was stunned. Lu Mingfei didn't want to say anything more to her. Yes, Jiang Shengsheng was dying. She was so healthy before, how could she get cancer? She stayed by his side all these years, so how could her cancer develop to the advanced stage and be incurable? He kept saying he loved her, but when she was so sick he was with another woman. How could this be considered love? Finally, Lu Mingfei couldn't even deceive himself anymore. Just like Jiang Shengsheng said, he had never loved anyone, and the one he loved the most was always himself. He walked out of the villa to take a breath outside. As soon as he went out, he saw Zhou Yun at the door. She must have been waiting for him for a long time. Zhou Yun's pregnancy has begun to show, but her complexion is terrible, her face is as pale as paper, and her originally young and beautiful face now looks much more haggard. Seeing Lu Mingfei, she rushed forward as if she had found a life-saving straw. "Mingfei, do you really not want me? I have your child in my belly. Look, he has grown so big already. You can't give him up." Lu Mingfei pulled her hand away with disgust, looked at her coldly and smiled. "Yeah, I also want to know how you managed to have a tryst with another man in a hotel while pregnant." When he thought that all this was caused by this woman, he felt so angry that his teeth itched. Zhou Yun was crying again. "I was wrong, Mingfei. I was threatened by him. Believe me, I am sincere to you." For a moment, Lu Mingfei seemed to see himself in front of Jiang Shengsheng, wondering if he was also so disgusting. He clamped Zhou Yun's jaw and said, "It's all your fault. If it weren't for you, Shengsheng and I would have lived a good life. You shouldn't have appeared in the first place, and I have never fallen in love with you. You deserve to die." At that moment, there was real murderous intent in Lu Mingfei's eyes. Zhou Yun was so frightened that she covered her stomach and tried to shrink back. "No, you can't blame me. Even if I wasn't there, you would have met someone else, and you would have betrayed the relationship between you and Jiang Shengsheng." Lu Mingfei did not get angry but laughed instead, and slowly let go of Zhou Yun's hand. "Maybe you're right, but it doesn't matter. I will have retribution, and you are no exception. I will not recognize the child in your belly. Either you risk your life to abort it, or, if you give birth to it, you will have to live a life of being abandoned and unloved like Jiang Shengsheng's mother for the rest of your life. And when the child is born, he will be a poor creature who is not loved just like Jiang Shengsheng." Lu Mingfei felt that this was the best way. Jiang Shengsheng would die and he would never get her forgiveness. Since no one would be better off, then no one would be better off. After saying this, he couldn't help but burst out laughing. This might be the way his life would end, a lonely life, living in endless regret and pain every day. This was the best possible ending for him.